postdoc. Is that right? It's our first postdoc, right? Yeah, first postdoc of the session. Yes! Thank you for making it this far. That's good. And she's from University of California, Davis, and she is another student from Michelle J. Russell. And she's going to be talking to us about the potential zoonotic risk in aquaponics. Please welcome Elizabeth Antaki. Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. Yes, I am a postdoc in Michelle J. Russell's lab. First of all, a little bit about myself is I'm completely a pathologist. I love pathology. Anything that's ooey gooey, developing lesions, it's great. So I did my master's and PhD at UC Davis, and with the associate of Dr. Michelle J. Russell, I was under Dr. Rob Atwell's lab for my PhD. I looked at E. coli 157 and how it is transferred into the environment from animals. I particularly looked at the infectious doses of animals and how the bacteria in the animal interact in the intestinal tissues. And yes, I know, it's poop, hey! So, and in my family here, yes, they always ask, like, you know, what I got my degree in, and it's poopology, come on. So, but it's great. It's very, very good to understand that stuff. So when I started my postdoc with Michelle, she brought up an idea of understanding the potential risks of aquaponics by a food safety side. And, you know, it was great. She kind of enticed me by saying there's possibly, you know, some fish pathology that could work in the system. So, you know, that led me into being interested in aquaponics, which I had never been, you know, involved in before. So before I started the project, I really had to understand what exactly aquaponics was. So I kind of Googled it briefly. And so what is aquaponics? Aquaculture, it's a combination of aquaculture, growing fish, and hydroponics, which is growing plants. How this works is that you feed the fish, and there's a system which have fish in it. You're feeding the fish are surviving and thriving, and the effluent, or the poop, you know, manure, is circulating through the system and feeding and growing the plants. And as the plants grow, then they detoxify the water, and then that water, that clean water, is circulated back into the fish. So it's a closed system, it's a good ecosystem, and if there's balance, then it survives. But if something from the outside contaminates that water, or another animal, or maybe people that have not, you know, cleaned their hands, or have good hygiene, or the system has a failure in it, then that potential contamination can circulate, and that's where the produce can be contaminated as well. So the benefits of aquaponics is it uses roughly 10% of uses roughly 10% of water used in conventional growing. No weeding or digging in the garden, since there is no soil, and can produce fish and plants for family all year round. Since fish waste is used, what about food safety? So that was our big concern, which leads us to this. There's a whole bunch of animals, and you know, there's a lot of questions about food safety here. But within this system, it really depends on the water that you're using. So if you're circulating contaminated water with other manure or anything else that potentially be contaminated, you're circulating that through your system, and there's a potential that your produce can be contaminated. So it has been shown that E. coli 157 and other enteropathogenic E. coli's, as well as salmonella and other pathogens zoonotic to people, have been shed by cattle as well as birds. And this is a good picture because there's tons of birds, so I was very happy about that. As well as this picture that the cattle are actually bathing in the water. So if you use your aquaponics system with this water, I would hope not, but there's a potential of E. coli 157 or even salmonella contaminating your system. So another point to come to you about food safety is the structure of your aquaponics system. So since this has become very popular, there's no actual design for a specific food safety related design. People make these in their backyards because they want to grow their own food and produce because they are concerned about food safety and the possible ways of contamination down when they're being processed. So this is, from my understanding, this is not the best design. There's cement buckets at the bottom with wood. Kind of looks like makeshift, but it also, another aspect of it is not covered by a net. So potential bird feces can be contaminated, maybe even mice, rodents can run across the system, and they can contaminate the system as well. So this is a better example of an aquaponic system that's covered. It's in an enclosure. It's also elevated off the ground, so there's less possible contamination by rodents and other small mammals. So this is very beautiful. I thought it was pretty. So another way, not only can the water be contaminated, but Erickson, a researcher, in 2012 published that pathogens can actually be uptaken by the root system of the produce. So she showed that pathogenic as well as non-pathogenic bacteria can be uptaken by the roots or by the stomata as well as the root system, including damaged tissue from the plant. So any aspect of the system can be uptaken into the plant tissue. But there had to be a high number of bacteria to actually have the roots uptake it. But if that outside contamination is still circulating and there's like a consistent contamination in the system, then there could be a high number of bacteria that could contaminate your system. So with this, a lot of people either personally consume their own fresh produce, or they sell it at farmers markets. So this takes into the question of, are they selling contaminated or potentially harmful produce in the farmers markets? So we wanted to answer this question. So a visiting scholar from China performed this study with our lab, Dr. Atwell, and it was a cross-sectional study survey of indicator and pathogenic bacteria on vegetables sold from Asian vendors at farmers markets in Northern California. This was just published this year, 2015, and it showed that there was possible contamination. There was the presence of fecal coliforms. There's no E. coli 157, but there was salmonella. So in the blue, there were 16 or 6.6 samples had detectable levels of salmonella, Cerevirs, Newport, Enteritidis, Agana, and Worthington, with the majority of positives found in cilantro and squash stems and leaves. There was a twofold higher probability of salmonella contamination in samples from growers or vendors who stated that they used organic farming practices compared with samples that were used at conventional farming practices. So, that is a huge question and concern. So, since we just went locally and just picked produce, there was salmonella, so then we question, what is going on? Is it from the growers or is it from the people that are handling the produce at the farmers markets? So this is post-field gel. I don't know whoever does post-field gel, but my colleague and I did this dendrogram, and it was just showing that the differences in strains versus the various markets. So there are several strains. There are common strains among certain markets, but there's also diversity among them all. But there is salmonella in the produce sometimes. This picture, I just wanted to show that not only can outside contamination, your system, but also putting your hands in your water, before you wash them, that could be a possible contamination, or sneezing, but you carry bacteria and that could potentially lead to contaminating the fish as well as contaminating your system. There has been shown that fish farmers there's antibiotics in the food for the fish, and then the fish farmers get these infections and then they become antibiotic resistant. So it's something to think about. So in summary, raw fish waste is a food safety concern. The structure of aquaponics system can contribute to the possible contamination. Exposure to pathogens in circulating water can be taken up by plant tissue. Contaminated produce can be sold in various markets, and people can also be modes of transmission. So personal hygiene and keeping everything clean is a very good idea. And you know, the people or individuals that have these background or these backyard gardens, they have a very good idea of growing their own food, but they don't understand the whole system and how you can possibly contaminate your system. And this is a happy system, so everyone's happy. But I just wanted to say thank you. And our project is, we're looking at different fish and the potential of different fish with different non-pathogenic as well as pathogenic bacteria. So, you know, different species of fish can carry these bacteria potentially longer due to differences in their microbiota. So we want to see at different concentrations of pathogenic and non-pathogenic as well as different fish, including different systems of having gravel at the bottom of your system that kind of kicks up the sediment, and that could potentially contaminate too. So we're looking at different avenues, but I think it's a very good move, and I think more research needs to be investigated in this. So thank you very much.